Good morning and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Suddhāso and we'll be looking at another discourse from the Buddha this morning from the Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 11, sutta number 13. So we'll be starting with homage to the Buddha, and then I'll read through the discourse and give some explanations, and then I'll take any questions at the end. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So as mentioned, this is Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 11, sutta number 13, Nandiyasutta, a discourse with a person named Nandiya. So the sutta begins, at one time the Buddha was staying in the land of the Sakyans, near Kapilavatthu in the Banyan Tree Monastery. So the Sakyans were the Buddha's own clan. So the Buddha was called Sakya Muni, the Muni, the sage from the Sakyan clan. So here the Buddha was traveling in his own home country, where all of his relatives, both close and distant, lived. So the Buddha would periodically go back to his home country and share the Dhamma, and actually ordained a large number of Sakyans, so a large number of his own relatives. He ordained as bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, and many of them went on to become arhats. So the Buddha here was, again, he was traveling in the land of the Sakyans. And it says, at that time, the Buddha wanted to commence the rain's residence at Sāvatthī. So he was currently among the Sakyans, but he was planning to go back to Sāvatthī, to spend the vasa at Sāvatthī. It says, Nandiya the Sakiyan heard about this and thought, why don't I also commence the rain's residence at Sāvatthī? There I can focus on my work, and from time to time, I get to see the Buddha. So I find this quite lovely. So a lay person decides that they're going to spend the summer in the presence of the Buddha. So basically moving to another town for a few months so that they can be close to the Buddha and get the opportunity to learn the Dhamma from the Buddha. So this is an indication of priorities. So rather than prioritizing sensuality or prioritizing fun or prioritizing income or anything like that. Instead, we should be choosing our living situation based upon prioritizing Dhamma practice. We should be trying to, as lay people, one should be trying to set up their life in a way that gives them maximum access to the Dhamma, that gives them the opportunity to go to monasteries, to see monks, to practice together with monks, to learn the Dhamma from monks. This is what one should be prioritizing when choosing one's place to live and in one's living situation. So the sutta continues. It says, the Buddha commenced the rain's residence in Sāvatthī, and so did Nandiya. So there Nandiya focused on his work and from time to time got to see the Buddha. At that time, several monks were making a robe for the Buddha, thinking that when his robe was finished and the 3 months of the rain's residence had passed, the Buddha would set out wandering. So this also was a common thing. So the lifestyle that was standard for Buddhist monks at the time of the Buddha was that they would spend most of the year wandering. So walking from place to place, maybe staying for a few days or a few weeks in a particular location that was suitable, and then continuing on. So constantly moving around. And then for 3 months of the year, so during the vasa, or the translated here as rain's residence, for those 3 months, then they would commit to staying in one place. So might be in a monastery, or it might be in a forest outside a village or something like that. But one would commit to staying in one place for 3 months, possibly with another community, possibly by oneself. But the idea was to commit to 3 months of stability, staying in one place for that period of time. And then after the end of the 3 months, then there's the tradition of offering a robe which has become ceremonialized into the Katina ceremony. And then after that, then the monks would set out wandering again. So they would get a new robe and then they would set out wandering. So this was the Buddha's plan. The Buddha was going to stay at Sāvatthī for the 3 months rains residence, the 3-month summer retreat. And then at the end of it, the monks would give him a new robe and the Buddha would set out wandering again. So it says, Nandiya the Sakiyan heard about this. So again, this is the person who left his own town in order to come stay where the Buddha was, so that he could be near the Buddha for the entire 3 months. And now he hears that the Buddha is about to leave. So it says, he went to the Buddha, bowed, sat down to one side and said to him, Bhante, I have heard that several monks are making a robe for the Buddha, thinking that when his robe is finished and the 3 months of the rains residence has passed, the Buddha will set out wandering. And Nandiya says, now we spend our life in various ways. Another way of translating that would be, we live in different ways. We live different lives. So he says, in what way should we practice? Or more literally, Kena Sivaharena Vehatabang means, how should we live? So Nandiya is saying, so the Buddha is, of course, a wandering ascetic renunciant monk. Whereas Nandiya is a lay person living an ordinary lay life. So Nandiya is saying, we live different lives. So how should I live my life? In other words, he's saying, I can't live like a monk. I can't be a wandering renunciant like the Buddha. Nandiya is saying, so since I live a different kind of life, the life of a lay person, how should I live this life? How should I live the lay person's life? And the translation here is actually quite strange. So, Kena Sivaharena Vehatabang, again, it means, how should I live? But it's translated here as, which of these should we practice? Which is just not particularly accurate. Anyway, so the Buddha says, Sadhu Sadhu Nandiya. So good. Says, it is appropriate that people such as you come to me and ask, we live in different ways, in what way should we live? And here the Buddha gives some advice. So this is advice for Nandiya in particular, but also for lay people in general. So he says, the Buddha says, the faithful succeed, not the faithless. The moral succeed, not the immoral. The energetic succeed, not the lazy. The mindful succeed, not the unmindful. Those with samadhi succeed, not those without samadhi. The wise succeed, not those without wisdom. So this is first. The Buddha is laying out a list of 6 qualities that one should make an effort to cultivate. And this is, of course, not just for lay people. Actually, any good Buddhist practitioner should be making an effort to develop these 6 qualities, because all 6 of these are very important aspects of the Buddhist path. So the first one is Saddha. So Saddha is translated here as faith, which is quite good. So Saddha is elsewhere defined in the suttas as particularly faith that the Buddha was fully enlightened, and that the Buddha taught a Dhamma which leads to full enlightenment, which leads to full awakening. So faith in the awakening of the Buddha and in the Dhamma which leads to awakening. This is the critical foundation of practice. So when we have some faith in Buddha and Dhamma, then we're much more likely to commit to practicing accordingly. Second, he says, the moral succeed, not the immoral. So those who have sila, those who have morality. Of course, the basic moral guidelines for lay people is the 5 precepts. So not killing, not stealing, not abusing sexuality, not telling lies, and not using intoxicants. So the 5 basic moral principles. But of course, the Buddha defined morality in broader terms as well. So morality means not harming anyone, yourself or others, and trying to help people, both yourself and others. So this is what it means to be moral. It means to be compassionate, to be kind, to try to be harmless, to try to be beneficial. This is what morality means. Next, as translated here, is the energetic succeed, not the lazy. So in Pali, this is aradda virya. So this means one should be courageous, resolute. So the word virya means heroic. So one should be heroic, not lazy or cowardly. So kusita, meaning lazy or cowardly. So this means that one should be willing to face the challenges in one's practice. So not shying away from the difficulties that one faces in practice, because it's true, Buddhist practice is difficult. It's not easy. It can be very challenging. But we want to heroically rise to that challenge, courageously face the challenges that we face in our practice. So whether it's physical pain, whether it's emotional pain, whether it's illness, whether it's financial hardship, whether it's relationship problems, whatever it is, we courageously face it and apply the tools of the Dhamma to dealing with that appropriately and in a wholesome way. Then next he says, the mindful succeed, not the unmindful. So again, mindfulness is another critical foundation of our practice. We need to be clearly aware of our body and mind at all times, because it's only through clear awareness of body and mind that we can train ourselves to do what is wholesome and to not do what is unwholesome. Next he says, those with samadhi succeed, not those without samadhi. So samadhi is the collectedness and unification of mind. So the quality of mind when it is stable, alert, motionless, and clearly aware. So this is especially relevant during the practice of meditation. So cultivating a mind which is silent, still, and fully aware. And the Buddha says, samahidang chittang yathabhutang jnanadasanang. So when the mind is in samadhi, it knows and sees things accurately. So the Buddha emphasizes in many places that samadhi is a necessary requisite for wisdom, because it's only when the mind is steady, stable, and clear, only then is the mind capable of wise awareness. Which then is the sixth of these qualities. The sixth one, the Buddha says, the wise succeed, not the unwise. So those who have panya, wisdom. And panya, of course, is defined in various ways throughout the suttas, though all of it has the same basic flavor. One of the more immediately applicable definitions of panya that he gives is the Buddha says that panya, wisdom, is that which knows the rise and fall of all things. In other words, that which observes the temporary, impermanent, non-persistent, ever-changing nature of all things. So the wisdom which observes anicca, which observes the temporariness, the impermanence, the non-persistence of phenomena. And so the Buddha says, when you're grounded in these six things, you should go on to establish mindfulness of five further things. It says, first, you should recollect the Tathagata. So the Tathagata is the truth finder, the one who has found the truth. The Tathagata is commonly used as a word for an awakened being, such as the Buddha or an Arhat. So the Buddha says, you should recollect the Tathagata, the truth finder. Thinking that blessed one is an Arhat, a fully awakened Buddha, accomplished in knowledge and conduct, sublime, knower of the world, supreme guide for those who wish to train, teacher of gods and humans, awakened and blessed. So in this way, you should establish mindfulness internally based on the Tathagata, based on the awakened one. So the first one here is recollection of the Buddha. So recollecting the qualities of the Buddha. Second one is recollection of the Dhamma. He says you should recollect the Dhamma. The Dhamma is well explained by the Buddha, apparent in the present life, immediately effective, inviting inspection, relevant, such that sensible people can know it for themselves. So this is recollection of the Dhamma. So establishing mindfulness based on recollection of the Dhamma. Then he says you should recollect your good friends. So this is kalyana mitta. Kalyana mitta is translated here simply as good friend, but it needs to be understood that it has the specific meaning of good spiritual practitioners who are your friends. So friends who themselves are committed to good spiritual practice and who support you in your spiritual practice as well. So he says, you should recollect your good spiritual friends, thinking, I am fortunate, so very fortunate, to have good spiritual friends who advise and instruct me out of kindness and sympathy. In this way, you should establish mindfulness internally based on good spiritual friends. So again, it's recollecting how good it is to have friends who encourage you, instruct you, admonish you in accordance with the Dhamma, in accordance with good spiritual principles. Next, the Buddha says, furthermore, you should recollect your own generosity. I am so fortunate, so very fortunate. Among people with hearts full of the stain of stinginess, I live at home rid of stinginess, freely generous, open-handed, loving to let go, committed to charity, loving to give and to share. In this way, you should establish mindfulness internally based on generosity. So in this way, the Buddha is saying one should recollect one's own generosity. Of course, this depends upon you actually being generous. So if you can't honestly recollect your own generosity, then that means you should cultivate more generosity. So as the Buddha says, with a heart free of stinginess, one should be generous, open-handed, loving to let go, committed to charity, loving to give and to share. So one should cultivate that attitude of being open-handed, of loving to give, loving to share. Delighting in the opportunity to let go of what you have and give it to others. And then when you do that, you can recollect what a wonderfully delightful, generous person you are. Next, he says, furthermore, you should recollect the devas. The devas are divine beings, celestial beings, angels, demigods. So it says, the Buddha says you should think, there are devas who, surpassing the company of devas that consume solid food, are reborn in a host of mind-made deities. They don't see in themselves anything more to do or anything that needs improvement. An irreversibly freed monk also does not see in themselves anything more to do or anything that needs improvement. In the same way, there are deities who, surpassing the company of deities that consume solid food, are reborn in a certain host of mind-made deities. They don't see in themselves anything more to do or anything that needs improvement. So this is different from the normal recollection of the devas that the Buddha gives. So the normal recollection of the devas is just to recall the different categories of devas and reflecting on how the devas became reborn as devas because they had cultivated a lot of good karma. They had cultivated a lot of wholesome qualities, which then gave them the karmic potency in order to be reborn in wholesome conditions, to be reborn as devas, as celestial beings. Here, though, the Buddha is emphasizing that there's also a category of devas who have cultivated such high spiritual faculties that they have nothing more to do. They have nothing that they need to improve. In other words, there are devas who are fully awakened. And recollecting, not just are there devas who are fully awakened, there are also humans who have that same exalted perfection of heart. So although this is put as recollecting the devas, it's actually effectively recollection of awakened beings, both devas and humans. So recollecting that awakening is possible, that it's something which is accessible, and that it's a state of happiness which is higher than the happiest gods. Then the Buddha ends with a simile. He says, a disciple of the noble ones who has these 11 qualities gives up bad, unwholesome qualities and does not cling to them. As in they don't cling to those unwholesome qualities. He says, it's like when a pot full of water is tipped over, so the water drains out and does not go back in. So in this way, when one dumps out these unwholesome qualities from the mind, that's like dumping out water from a pot. Or he says, suppose there was an uncontrolled fire. It burns up dry woodland and doesn't go back over what has burned. So similarly, he's saying, so this is like burning up all the harmful qualities in your mind. So cultivating these 11 good qualities is like dumping out the bad qualities, just like dumping out a pot of water, or it's like burning up the bad qualities, just like a fire burning up dry woodland. He says, in the same way, a disciple of the noble ones who has these 11 qualities gives up bad, unwholesome qualities and does not cling to them. So that's the end of the discourse. So we can respect the sutta with 3 sadhus, and I'll see if there's any questions. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And hello to the people joining in online. Hello to Richard, Jayanta, Maria, Bhumika, Craig, Amy, and whoever else is watching. And I see a question here from Richard. He says, how to make arise thoughts of the Dhamma apart from the Anusatis? Or are the Anusatis the only way? So the Anusatis are one way, but another way which can be really helpful is to read some suttas or read some verses of Dhamma and bring those to mind. So, for example, you might read some verses from the Dhammapada and find a few of those verses that you really like, that really strike you. Maybe memorize them. The Dhammapada verses are quite short. Most of them are only 4 lines, 4 phrases. And then during meditation, bring up to mind, recollect those Dhamma verses and roll them around in your mind. Think about them, contemplate them, enjoy them, appreciate the beauty and clarity of the Dhamma. So this is a way of recollecting the Dhamma, is to memorize and recollect specific passages or verses of Dhamma that you especially like. And that's the only question. So we'll go ahead and conclude at this time with 3 more sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you all next time.